Jury Duty Class, July 15th, 2024, Chattanooga, Tennessee, USA. The federal courthouse looked abandoned when Lexi Green arrived early in the parking lot. She had seen the building many times from the outside, but never been inside. She exited her car and followed a sidewalk toward the elaborate front entrance. A groundskeeper trimming bushes stopped her. "You here for jury duty?"
"I sure am."
"You go through the side entrance," the groundskeeper said, pointing to an easily overlooked door. "Right down the hallway to the security check. I wish they would give you folks clear directions." Lexi thanked him and found the long, dimly lit corridor leading to a station with a metal detector and X-ray scanner. A tired-looking security guard suspiciously examined her large handbag. "You have any phones, computers, or recording devices in here?"
"Oh, no. I read the instructions carefully and left my phone behind."
Lexi reached in the bag and pulled out a large book filled with children's stories.
"But I didn't see any restrictions on books, so I brought this. I'm a third-grade teacher, and I like reading out loud to my class. If there's time today, I'm hoping to find some new stories they'll enjoy."
The guard ignored the book and replied, "I'm only here to check on weapons and electronics." Lexi made it past the inspection and walked into a meeting room filled with around 50 wooden chairs. On one side of the room held a table filled with packaged snacks and bottles of juice. 2 people were already sitting down. A third stood at the front of the room and introduced herself as Maria. "Grab a snack if you'd like, and pick your favorite chair," Maria said to Lexi. "I'll be your tour guide for today." Maria had short hair and wore a skirt. She was not very tall, but Lexi could tell from her commanding voice that she was used to ordering people around. Lexi selected a bag of mini cookies and nibbled as she watched more people arrive. After another 20 minutes, the room was packed with a perfect cross-section of the local population. Lexi noted every possible age and race demographic. Maria's voice grew louder as the room filled up. When she looked satisfied that everyone was present, she made some general announcements. "I call myself the jury wrangler. If you need to ask a question, you ask me. Don't talk to anyone else you'll see in the courtroom, including the judge, the lawyers, the defendant, or the defendant's family. Be on your best behavior. You do not want a contempt of court charge." When Maria finished frightening the room, she played a video on a large TV screen. The video showed a Supreme Court justice thanking them for their service and reminding them that impartial peer juries kept the country fair and free. And everyone had an obligation to serve, no matter what else they might rather be doing. The video ended, and Maria handed out slips of paper containing numbers. Lexi became potential juror number 15. Maria ordered everyone to follow her in an orderly line into the courtroom. They arrived to find a judge sitting on a raised wooden platform and sets of lawyers around floor-level tables. Wood paneling covered all 4 of the room's walls. The place was deathly quiet and intimidating. The jury candidates filed into hard wooden chairs with Lexi somewhere in the middle of the collection. She strained to see a man wearing a poorly fitting gray suit, whom she assumed was the defendant, huddled next to 2 lawyers. 2 women sat rigidly behind him. The judge finally spoke when everyone from the jury pool was seated and the door into the courtroom closed. "I remind you not to discuss the particulars of this case when the trial proceeds. Today will be conduct jury selection. If you are one of the 14 jurors selected, I anticipate you serving another 10 days. Today's selection process should finish up by 1 p.m. if everything goes smoothly. Now, I'd like for each of you to stand and introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from and what you do for a living. You can add any other short detail you think is important. Let's begin with number 1. None of the prospective jurors said much when they stood. Lexi learned that the person sitting to her left, Garth Sanderson, was some type of high-powered vice president. He introduced himself with arrogant confidence. Sitting on Lexi's right was a girl named Kimmy Dyrek. She wore dark makeup and claimed to be a combination hairstylist and esthetician. On the other side of Kimmy, underdressed in a muscle shirt, sat Lance Valhalla. When it was his turn to speak, he shifted nervously as if he was on trial and explained that he was between jobs. When Lexi introduced herself as a third-grade teacher, she thought she saw both of her nearest neighbors smirk, like they were not surprised or impressed. Maybe Lexi felt overly sensitive, but those smirks seemed to imply she was not very interesting or fun to be around. With everyone introduced, the judge made them hold up their right hands and swear to be fair and follow the law. Then the judge and lawyers abruptly stood and left the courtroom through a side door. It was Maria's turn to take over. "You'll go one by one into a conference room where you'll be asked some questions," Maria explained. "Only speak when spoken to, and we should get through this phase quickly. Juror number 1, you're up." The first candidate apprehensively followed Maria toward the conference room. Everyone else was left wondering how long they would be sitting there. "I don't have time for this," Garth muttered to himself on Lexi's left. "I got million-dollar decisions to make. I better be out of here by 1 p.m.
"There's no way I can be on this jury,"
Kimmy whispered on Lexi's right.
"Was that judge serious about it taking 10 days? I've got concert tickets for next week that I bought almost a year ago."
Kimmy was not speaking to anyone in particular, but when Lance overheard, he wanted to know about the concert. They talked for a minute, and then their conversation died away in the oppressively serious surroundings. Garth adjusted in his chair, first sitting up straight and then slouching. He removed his watch and fiddled with the dials. "It's moronic we can't bring phones in here. At least then I could get something done," he said in a voice louder than a whisper. He closed his eyes as if he might fall into a nap, but they quickly popped back open and he stared blankly into the space in front of him. On the other side of Lexi, Kimmy wore a similar expression.
"I almost forgot," Lexi said quietly. "I brought something to read."
She reached into her handbag and pulled out a heavy collection of children's stories. She tilted it left and right to show both of her neighbors.
"I'm happy to let you borrow it. We could take turns."
"Is that a book for kids?" Garth asked cynically. "I'm probably a little too old."
"I don't mind reading stories as long as they're true crime," Kimmy added. "Or something a little more adult, if you know what I mean."
"Let me know if you change your mind," Lexi replied. She opened the book with a smile. A few minutes later, she giggled over the story in front of her. Garth pretended not to notice. To pass the time, he pulled the shoestring from one of his shoes and threaded it back into the holes. Kimmy picked at the nail polish, covering her thumb. "Juror number 2, they're ready for you," Maria announced from across the courtroom. "Oh, they're only on number 2? Garth asked in agony. "This is going to take forever." He tried slumping in his chair again and stared at the ceiling. Kimmy moaned and cried, "I think I'm going to kill myself." Garth remained motionless for 5 minutes before leaning toward Lexi. "You know, maybe I wouldn't mind a story." Kimmy overheard and added,
"Me too."
Lexi turned to Garth and said,
"Since you asked first, I guess you get the book first."
"I was kind of thinking you could read it out loud," Garth replied. "Then we wouldn't have to pass it back and forth."
"Out loud? I suppose I could," Lexi replied with a chuckle. "I do this kind of thing all the time in my classroom."
Lexi turned a page and said in a soothing voice,
"Okay, this one is about a rabbit, a fox, and a bear. You'd call it more of a fable than a story."
As she began her narration, Lance leaned over and said, "Can you make it a little louder? I can't hear." Lexi increased her volume a touch. All conversations closest to her stopped as people strained to listen. The fable ended with the rabbit outsmarting the fox and the bear. Garth nodded his head, chuckled slightly, and said, "That's pretty good. How about another one?" Lexi smiled at the compliment.
"It looks like the next story's about a girl trying to make her school's basketball team. When I read these kinds of stories in class, I try to do different voices, so I'll try some of that here."
The prospective jurors sitting behind Lexi scooted their chairs forward, and those in front scooted backward.
"Can you read a little louder?"
called someone 5 chairs away. Lexi cleared her throat and began. Garth closed his eyes, and his mouth curved into a grin as he listened. Kimmy barely blinked as she stared at Lexi's moving mouth.
"Another one!"
they cried at the end of each story. By the time juror number 10 was summoned to the conference room, someone seated near the edge of the chairs asked Maria if they could be rearranged in a circle with Lexi sitting in the middle. Maria took a look around the room like the request must be some kind of joke. When all she saw in return was pleading faces, she shrugged her shoulders and gave permission, as long as things did not get rowdy. Lexi stood up, and her fellow jurors scrambled to rearrange the chairs. Gordon and Kimmy insisted they stay closest to the storyteller. The confined audience was twice the size Lexi normally entertained, and much older. But she pretended she was back in a classroom and facing the same kind of attentive faces. She read nonstop until Maria called her number. "Here, you keep reading," Lexi said, handing the storybook to Kimmy.
"I can't do the voices,"
Kimmy protested.
"Just try your best."
Every set of eyes in the room followed Lexi to the side door. She found the judge and lawyers looking tense inside the narrow conference room. They asked her about her taxes and debts she owed. Was she good with money? Had she ever been ensnared in a fraudulent phone or online scheme? Lexi's heart raced as she answered the questions. It was over before she expected, and with relief, she returned to the courtroom. "It's about time," Garth called as Lexi shuffled to her chair. "You've got to take over again. Kimmy's horrible."
"I told you I couldn't do the voices,"
Kimmy protested. "It's not about the voices. You pause in all the wrong places. Sometimes you're too fast, and then you're too slow."
"Well, excuse me,"
Kimmy cried. "I'm happy to keep reading, but my mouth is so dry I'm afraid I need a drink," Lexi said. Garth, Lance, and 2 other jurors hurried out of the room without worrying about contempt of court charges. They returned with a bottle of water despite the no eating and drinking sign, and Lexi took her place in the reading chair after chugging the water. She read until Maria arrived to announce they were all being released for an hour-long lunch break. "Oh, so much for being done by 1 o'clock. Looks like we're here for the rest of the day," Garth said, but without the same disgust in his voice he used in his earlier complaints. He and several other jurors bought Lexi a sandwich and drink at a shop across the street from the courthouse and continued asking if they could get her anything else. "How's your throat?"
"Well rested?"
"Can you last the rest of the afternoon?" No one thought to buy a book or magazine for themselves from the drugstore at the end of the block. Lexi returned to the center of attention inside the courtroom and put all her energy into storytelling. Jurors left the room one by one for interviews, and the afternoon passed more quickly than the morning. Around 5 p.m., Maria announced that the judge and lawyers were returning to the courtroom and all the chairs should be rearranged into neat rows. "They'll announce the 14 of you who will be on the trial jury, and the rest of you will be dismissed," Maria added. Kimmy turned to Lexi and said,
"If I have to be on this jury, you better be on it too, or I'll pitch a fit."
Lance, who addressed Lexi as Miss Green, declared that he would rather spend time in jail than be on a jury without her. The judge and lawyers traipsed to their spots in front of the room and mumbled back and forth to each other. Then the judge began reading numbers for jurors who were dismissed and who would not need to sit through the long trial. Lexi thought to herself that she might not mind sticking around. She enjoyed the celebrity status brought by her storytelling and could not remember a time she had been treated so respectfully by a group of adults. Her mindset about the trial had changed dramatically since the judge had first announced it would take 10 days. As the judge slowly called numbers, relieved candidates stood and shuffled toward the courtroom's exit. Many of them paused to shake Lexi's hand before disappearing. When the judge read Lexi's number, a collective groan rose from the remaining jurors. It was so loud, an outside observer might have expected the judge to bang his gavel and shout, "Order in the court!" Instead, The judge and lawyers simply gawked at Lexi in confusion as she stood and politely made her way down her row of chairs. Suddenly, Lexi stopped and returned to where Garth sat. She pulled the heavy storybook from her handbag and handed it to him. "If you aren't picked for the jury, maybe you can pass this along to someone who is. I figure they'll need it a lot more than me." Garth smirked and nodded as he clutched the book. "Thanks, Ms. Green."